Today actually I would be taking you around something very important, that is reintroduction. Knowing the fact when we are losing species every day, we have dying rivers, we have drying wetlands, we have shrinking forest cover, and then which ultimately lead to extinction of many species. And therefore reintroduction become very important tool for conservation. So I would be discussing about reintroduction, how it is important, and what are the species which need to be reintroduced, and how one of the very important reintroduction program is in progress in India. Knowing the fact that right from microbes to human beings constitute biodiversity, means biodiversity is very important for all of us. And it is also very important to understand that biodiversity is difficult to quantify precisely, even with the tools and data resources that are available today. And therefore, to understand biodiversity, it is very important to estimate it precisely because it has a lot of consequences, and its understanding can make you survive many species. Therefore, when you look at the global scenario, there are global and local extinction of many species. There are many species which we have already lost. For example, when you look at one of the beautiful bird, that is dodo, which we have lost long ago from Mauritius. It was a beautiful kind of pigeon which was surviving on an island of Mauritius. But when human beings started settling on the island, slowly these birds disappeared, because that would become very easiest prey to the human beings. And then when human beings started introducing cats, dogs, etc., their nest being raided by those introduced mammals, and ultimately we have lost this beautiful bird dodo. Similarly, from India and Myanmar, we have lost pink-headed duck. Now it is restricted to postal stamp. Why we have lost? Because we become so greedy that most of the marshes which supported pink-headed duck slowly being occupied by human beings for their buildings, for their agricultural practices. We have drained those marshes, and we lost the habitat for pink-headed duck, and now we don't have any pink-headed duck. If you want to see, you have to look at the photographs of pink-headed duck. Similarly, there are many local extinction. For example, in Delhi, we have already lost Tylophora indica, one of the very important medicinal plant for asthma. Similarly, another medicinal plant, which is Ceropegia bulbosa, we have already lost. So therefore, when you understand the biodiversity is extent and consequences of your loss, that would give you an idea and direction that how you conserve them. And there are many species which are now restricted to single site in India. For example, the beautiful Barasinga. There are 3 species of Barasinga. If you see any deer which has antler, usually we identify those antlers as a Barasinga. But for your information, I must share that all deers with antlers are not Barasinga. The water Barasinga, there are 3 subspecies of Barasinga in India. One is Sarvus duboseli branderi, that is hard ground Barasinga. Till recently it was restricted to single site, that is Kanha National Park and Sanctuary. Only 2 years ago it was reintroduced in Satpura Tiger Reserve in Madhya Pradesh, and it has now second population. Similarly, the other photograph down there, if you see, that is Sarvus duboseli, and that is another Barasinga which you find only in Dudhwa Tiger Reserve. And there is another subspecies of Barasinga which is restricted to single site in Kaziranga National Park, that is in Assam. So these species are so important. They have a small distribution range, and if anything happens to them, quickly we wipe out the population. Similarly, you look at this beautiful deer. This is a dancing deer which you call it as Sarus idli. It is restricted to single site in Manipur. There is a lake called Kebul Lamjo, and it actually walks on floating vegetation, what you call as fumdi, and when it walks, it tries to controls in movement, and therefore it appears from a distance that the deer is dancing. such a beautiful deer with an excellent arrangement of antlers. If you look at it, and since it has a single side, then it has little hope to survive for a longer period of time. Similarly, the Hangul, Cervus elephas, it is restricted only in Kashmir, and it is known as Kashmir stag. And unfortunately, we have only few individuals left in India, and it requires serious attention, and only then we can protect this beautiful animal, what we call as Kashmir stag or Cervus elephas. There is another species of plant which is restricted to single site on a Khasi hill of Meghalaya, and it is insectivorous plant which we call as Nepenthes khasiana. And there are many plants, but this particular species, that Nepenthes, you find which largely depend on what you call insect, and many a times on small mammals and reptiles they feed on, and a few hundred left. If we lose this precious species, then probably giving response to entire world would be difficult. Knowing the fact India is a country where we worship plants and animals, and if we lose this beautiful plant, then probably entire world will look at us, that how we behave with our plants and animals. So a study suggests that when you look at the pre-human extinction rate, it was very slow. It was just 0.1 extinction per million species. But the way human beings are acting today, the current extinction rate is approximately 100 extinction per million species per year. We are heading towards 6th mass extinction. We should not worry about extinction, because extinction is a process which happens, but the rate of extinction is so fast that many species we lose even without knowing them, and that would be irony. That would be the irony for the entire human community, that the many species which are very important for human beings and its survival will lose it without understanding its uses. Therefore, as I told you earlier, that there are many local and global extinction. We lost tigers in Sariska and Panna Tiger Reserve recently in 2006-07, but slowly we have reintroduced them, and the population is doing very well, and therefore it gives us a hope that the species which we are losing, probably through reintroduction, we can repopulate these species and give them some lease of life. So what is the solution for disappearing free-ranging population? So in my opinion, reintroduction is the best solution and probably the only solution in today's world. So what is reintroduction? How we see reintroduction? Actually, reintroduction is very important to realize evolutionary potential and to promote genetic vigor. It is very important to redistribute the population in their original historical geographical ranges, because reintroduction may be initiated to repopulate the area where the species of interest once roamed and have now completely wiped out. That is the only way that, in the absence of ecological corridor, now it is not possible that free-ranging population can move from one place to other place and get redistributed in their geographical ranges where once they exist. So what is the solution? So now solution is reintroduction. You can take some individuals and reintroduce somewhere else where originally they were exist. So today, when you look at the among mega carnivore, the most threatened species would be Asiatic lion, and it is very interesting to see that Asiatic lion exists only in India. Only in India. When you look at the former historical geographical ranges, the Asiatic lion was roamed in Asia from Palestine in the west to Plymouth in the eastern India, and now it is restricted to single site that is green in color. If you look at it, huge wide range of global distribution of Asiatic lion now shrink to a small pocket in Gujarat, and that is the irony. It suggests that how we look at our species and how we actually handle our species. When you look at the distribution of Asiatic lion in India, the historical distribution in India subcontinent is very unique. If you look at it, even we had Asiatic lion in Haryana. It was reported from Delhi, near Delhi University. We have Delhi Ridge, which is called as Kamnanu Ridge. You find Asiatic lion there. Similarly, in Madhya Pradesh, it was in Gwalior, Guna, very close to Shopur district. There are many places where Asiatic lion was distributed, but now it is restricted to single site, that is Gir National Park and Sanctuary in Gujarat. So, what is the current status? When you look at the current status of Asiatic lion, the single site, which is Gir National Park and Sanctuaries, that is the last home today of world population. And today we have over 500 individual lions, but they are facing serious extinction threat, because conservation biology suggests that if a small population restricted to single site, they face variety of extinction threat. Variety. What are those variety? If any epidemic comes, a disease comes, the entire population can wiped out in one go. And then entire world will complaining towards us that a country which is worshipping animals and plants could not protect an animal which is restricted only to India. And that is the point we need to see seriously. A beautiful, majestic animal like Asiatic lion should survive for a longer period of time. So therefore, looking at the single population and the growth of the population from a very small nucleus population of 1820, it itself suggests that the homozygosity increases so much that it has poor variability, and it raises a lot of questions about the genetic diversity of this species, and therefore any epidemic can create huge problem for this individual species, and therefore Asiatic lion of Gir forest become most threatened population of large carnivore in the world. So finally a concept came for reintroduction of Asiatic lion, knowing the fact that today, for example, if you look at an analogy that you have 500 eggs in a single tokery, and in a single basket a person is carrying on his head and suddenly he falls down. So entire egg will fall down and not a single egg will survive, and you will have nothing in your hand. And looking at this scenario, a population and habitat viability analysis workshop was held in Vadodara in 1993. And forest department from different states like Gujarat, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan and Haryana, they were asked to find out potential sites for introduction of Asiatic lion. And after looking at the various aspects, 3 areas were shortlisted finally for possible reintroduction of Asiatic lion, and they were Darra Jawahar Sagar and Sitamata Sanctuary in Rajasthan and Kuno Wildlife Sanctuary in Madhya Pradesh. It's very important to understand that IUCN has made a proper guideline to see that how reintroduction can took place, and on the basis of that entire studies has been carried out, and finally Kuno Wildlife Sanctuary selected as a potential site. When the site was selected as a potential site, many short-term studies were carried out to look at the sociological and ecological parameters, that whether this sanctuary is suitable for reintroduction or not. Because when you look at the reintroduction process, there are a few very important things you need to look at it. A, you need to look at the site, that what was the reason for extermination of species in question. Do this sanctuary is ready to accept these species at present? What is the status of sanctuary at present? And whether that reason for extermination of a species have been removed or not. What is the prey base, etc. What is the status of habitat? All these things need to be looked after, and therefore you need to look at sociological and ecological parameters, and for which many short-term studies were carried out looking at the sociological and ecological parameters, and ultimately Kuno Wildlife Sanctuary of Shopur district in northwest Madhya Pradesh selected as a potential site for introduction of Asiatic lion. When this site was selected as a second home, there were 24 villages inside, and more than 100,000 cattle, largely dependent on the habitat of herbivores, and wild prey population was very low, but it had potential to improve it. So therefore, the first and foremost thing was to find out a solution that how 24 villages can be rehabilitated outside. And it was very difficult, because rehabilitating a human being outside is not easy task, and therefore a committee was formed by the state government, and that committee visited the site and asked villagers that are they willing to go out, because the life of the villagers were very harsh inside, because during monsoon a river Kuno, which flows right in the middle of the sanctuary, was not allowing movement of the villagers, and therefore they had limited movement. The schools, the other facilities were not there. I tell you one story. When first time I went there, and I met then Divisional Forest Officer Jasveer Singh Chauhan. I went there to work in Kuno, and he took me on his jeep inside the park. When we just went inside the park, we saw that one woman, pregnant woman, in her advanced stage, was coming on bullock cart. We quickly took that woman on our car and drove to the nearest tehsil, but unfortunately that woman could not survive. Then we also tried to interact with the villages, and ultimately villages agreed, and a program was made, supported by Government of India, and all the 24 villages were taken out. Within the sanctuary there were 100,000 cattle. These cattle were coming from neighboring state like Rajasthan, and they were staying inside the sanctuary during entire monsoon, and depleting entire habitat, and therefore there was no space for prey base to grow. It was surprising to see that the cheetal was there, sambar was there, wild pigs were there, chinkara was there, but they were not breeding. The reason we tried to find out, because the water hole was occupied by cattle, all the water all along Kuno, and human beings, and the grassland was occupied by cattle, livestock, and therefore these animals had characteristics that until unless they have food security, they cannot breed. They are unlike human beings, I must tell you. They are very unique. If you look at the sanctuary, it's a beautiful sanctuary. It looks like a leaf, and right in the middle a serrated leaf has a midri in the form of a river, which is Kuno river, which just bisect the sanctuary into two halves. It is situated in Shivpur district, and the total area of sanctuary is being maintained as 1,269 square kilometer as a division, and the sanctuary area is about 345 square kilometer. And today it has 8 ranges. If you look at it, now it has huge area, and now government has proposed to elevate this sanctuary as a national park. And today when you look at the entire Kuno Wildlife Division, which is very huge, and it has now 8 ranges. You can think about it, it's a huge area, and it is also surrounded by huge forest area of Shivpur territorial division. So almost when you look at it, it covers around 3,000 square kilometer of area, which further connects towards the Ranthambore Tiger Reserve. So it's a beautiful area. Actually, river Kuno gives life to entire Kuno Wildlife Sanctuary. When you look at these slides, it itself suggests that this is magnificent river, and as I showed you in the map, that this river bisects the entire sanctuary, and it's a small river, and in fact seasonal river. It does not flow throughout the year, but yes, water stays all along in the form of water pool, what locally people call it as a day, and those day actually being utilized by animals even during pinch period in the summer, and therefore this river is actually lifeline for entire sanctuary. So when you look at Kuno Wildlife Sanctuary, where 24 villages rehabilitated outside the sanctuary, grazing prohibited, process of habitat improvement initiated long back, and steps taken to improve prey base. for which actually I have been involved also in capturing nilgai, and we initiated mass capture of nilgai. We prepared a protocol for Madhya Pradesh government in association with Wildlife Institute of India, where we worked in Bhind, where we tried to see that there were a lot of crop raiding nilgai and there were many complaints of the people. Therefore, we used drop net technique to capture nilgai and transported them to the Kuno Wildlife Sanctuary. When you look at Kuno, villages inside, it was a very remote area, and since it falls under Chambal region, dacoit bandits were a serious problem, and therefore villagers kept guarding their village by making huge machan. If you look at the photograph, and two persons holding gun and looking at the all trails which enters into the village, and there was a small school of the village, and the only medium of transport was bullock cart. But now they have been rehabilitated out, where they had a small check dam on Kumari river, and they have been rehabilitated near Agra village of Shopur district in Bijaypur Tehsil. Schools was made, schools was constructed, road was made, and now lift irrigation, pump, everything was given to the village, and they are happily staying there. They have beautiful agriculture field. When you look at the floral description of the sanctuary, which is proposed second home for Asiatic lion, it actually a typical dry deciduous forest dominated by Enogesis pendula. This is a species which once upon a time we had plenty in Delhi, which we have lost. There are few individuals are left near Dhaula Kuan. This is Kardai, and it is very important species. Then we have khair there, khair, which is katha made up of this khair. Khair is a very important species of any dry deciduous condition. It is Acacia catachu. Then you have Enogesis latifolia, and the another important species which is salai, what you call as Boswellia serrata. And that Boswellia serrata is such a beautiful species. I'll let you know later that how the native and local community utilize salai for their own purpose. So this is the characteristic of Kuno being a dry deciduous forest. When you look at this, these are the forests. This is Khair forest, Kardai forest, Khair forest during summer because it's a dry forest. Then probably during summer finding single leaf would be very difficult. Similarly, Kardai forest during summer becomes so dry, but the fallen leaves of those Kardai become very important food material for all herbivore, including cheetal, sambar, and other species. Similarly, this is Dava forest, and interestingly, when you look at this green forest of Salai, that become very important, and it is important because it is important source of livelihood support for the neighborhood communities. And in Kuno, there were Saharia tribe inside who were rehabilitated outside. There were about 1,500 families which have been rehabilitated out, and all along Kuno you have plenty of Salai forest, what you call as Boswellia serrata. And I have seen that during marriage, actually the girls were getting trees in dowry, like 5 trees and 10 trees, because during a particular season they take out resins out of it, and those resins are very important for making many material, including lohwan, which is being utilized for many religious purpose. So it has important economic value for the neighborhood communities. Similarly, when you look at the abundant agriculture field from where villages have been relocated and rehabilitated outside, they become important habitat for the various animals. If you see nilgai, chinkara, and wild pigs, you can see. When you look at this slide, this is the characteristic feature of Kuno Wildlife Sanctuary. Actually, when you look at this forest type, this represents savanna woodland, where you have huge grassland interspersed with some of the tree species, and it gives you beautiful feeling that how a species like Asiatic lion can roam around and capture prey and survive for longer period of time. Similarly, the succession in different grass species are taking place very well. And when you look at the faunal species, you find all fauna which you find in any typical dry deciduous forest, and most important is chital, which is prey base for lion, most important prey base for lion in Gir, which you find in plenty in Kuno. These are the important prey base, and these are the important bird species which you find. And this is some of the major carnivore we found during the study, which includes leopard also. And this is the outcome of my study when I have suggested that how entire forest can be divided into 8 forest types, and chital was one of the very important prey base. Based on my study, actually, when I have done everything, and then we requested Government of India that we need to get some lions, Asiatic lion from Gir, but Gujarat government refused to share any lions, and therefore a PIL was filed in Supreme Court of India in 2006 with a very simple prey that Wildlife Institute has prepared some basic thing for Kuno, for the reintroduction of Asiatic lion that should be implemented. And when you look at it, this entire PIL gone for 6 years, in which we have presented many documents, and this was one of them, that how chital population slowly started growing from 6 individual per square kilometer to about 60 today. Similarly, other species started growing in. And right in the middle, Government of India has decided, since the state government is not sharing Asiatic lion, can't we go for African cheetah? But we requested Supreme Court that don't allow African cheetah, because when look at the growing prey base, the most important catchable prey base is chinkara, which won't growing well because the population is reducing, and therefore when population reduces, this cheetah will go out and there will be a serious man-animal conflict. And finally, Supreme Court has directed that you have to make, already a plan was made in 2002-2016, and Supreme Court has directed for many other species including Asiatic lion, suggested that you plan for a species recovery in the entire area. And finally Supreme Court had made expert committee who has visited couple of times in Kuno and proposed that reintroduction is the only hope for recovery of many threatened species. But unfortunately, when you look at it, Asiatic lion could not found its second home so far. It's very sad to see that even though Supreme Court has given it directions in year 2013, still Asiatic lion did not found its second home. But when you look at the latest news, Gir itself lost 184 lions in 2016-17, which itself suggests that the request for Kuno was only 2 pride initially, which covers not more than 20 individuals. And what is the status of Asiatic lion? You see now that when we are losing many lions every year, why government is not thinking about reintroducing lion in Kuno? Because if animals are dying due to disease, then it's a serious indication. We need to address it quickly. Recently, Principal Chief Conservator of Forest suggested that as per Supreme Court directives, we need to look at the IUCN guidelines, and I don't know how much time it will take, because reintroduction is the only solution for Asiatic lion, and we need many more free-ranging population of Asiatic lion, including Kuno Wildlife Sanctuary. Otherwise, it would be very difficult. Thank you so much.